Okay, welcome back to the fourth part of the online lecture. We're going to cover the next chapter in the book, which is looking at social media research. So what we're really interested in is how can we actually use social media for consumer insights. But first we need to understand a little bit about the research process. So what we're going to talk about is the types of data and methods we use in research. We're going to talk about how we can conduct qualitative research. We're going to talk about the methods used for quantitative social media. So it's important that we understand the difference between qualitative, which is very descriptive, and quantitative, which is about measurement. And we're going to talk about the common errors and biases associated with social media research. So the thing is, why do we do research? Basically, every decision we make as marketers is based on what we know about the target audience. So we're not making blind guesses when we make investments or take out advertisements. We're using knowledge that we've gathered, and it's important to do that on a systematic basis. So, research is about systematic investigation. So, what can we learn about consumer personalities, their past experiences? What motivates them? What are they afraid of? How do they respond to campaigns? What encourages brand loyalty and, media usage? So the more we can learn about consumers, the more effectively we can conduct marketing. So the first part we're going to talk a little bit about it is data and how data is used in media research. First, it's important to kind of just talk about, the types of research that are conducted. So, we often talk about either primary or secondary research. So secondary research is using information that's already collected. So these are databases and data sets that are already available. But primary research is where we collect the information solely for the research purpose at hand. So that secondary research data is already available. It might be organizational records, books, Central Statistics Office figures, websites, a whole range of information that's already available. Might be internal to the organization, but it could be publicly published or available by syndicated sources who make data available to people. So you could have, information about the industry you're in and competitors, brand history, all sorts of information that people have gathered. So, public sources, things like census, population data, demographics. So this is information that's gathered every couple of years by the government to help with decision making. Companies House, the CRO, will have financial statements. And then you'll have commercial data sets about the size of industry and sector, demographic data. And then a huge resource of data that's available to you as students is library databases. So what are the advantages of secondary data? It can be cheap if it's already collected, but it's often quite expensive. Some of these data sets are extremely expensive. It's quick because it's already there, so you don't have to go out and collect it. So if you don't have the skills to collect primary data, using secondary data is good. It can be very comprehensive. And the other advantage as well is rather than actually spending all this time collecting data, you can focus resources on analysis. That's a big advantage of secondary data. Unfortunately, the disadvantages around it is that often it's been collected for a different purpose. So it's not actually collected specifically for the purpose we're doing. It may not be representative of your sample. So you may get a whole series of data collected in the United States, and it may not be appropriate, say, for an Irish market. And the argument is it's not collected specifically for you, and you don't have sole ownership of it. So there's no unique perspective. It becomes a commodity. Anybody can do it and use it. And then there's ethical issues around it as well, where it may not be appropriate to use data for purposes other than what it's been collected for. And the whole ethical issues around data are becoming to the fore at the moment with the new GDPR regulations about data protection. So huge obligations on organizations to handle data ethically. And we see it was in the news during the week that Uber had failed to disclose that they'd had lost customer data. Not only that, they actually paid the people who stole the data a ransom to destroy it. So extremely unethical behavior by the organization. So then primary social media research is where we actually collect data ourselves in social spaces. So we could be looking at consumer diaries, so people's posts, the social media posts they make on a daily basis. Could be interviews, focus groups, surveys, and experiments. So this is when we're actually specifically collecting data for the research purpose at hand. So we go out to collect information to answer a specific question we posed ourselves. So it's really useful to understand consumers. So we're interested in psychological makeup of our customers. What are their spending patterns and the responsiveness to messages, appeals, and offers. So, what we're actually trying to do here is find out specific information and knowledge about our customers. So, we've different research methods. So the kind of research that I conduct myself is often exploratory qualitative methods. So we focus on things like observation, where we actually study people in action. We use focus groups where we bring in a group of customers and we ask them for their opinion. Or we conduct in-depth interviews. So we actually sit down with somebody and we go through a topic in detail. And that can often be quite open-ended. And the idea is to get a really rich description of the other person's experience. But other methods are more descriptive, so we can do something like a survey, which tends to be quantitative, but it'll actually, will actually describe something that's happened. Or we can carry out experiments, so we can do simulations. We can use computer models to simulate things, or we can do test markets, where we can actually simulate or model a market by setting up an experiment. So when we're conducting research in social media, that can either include primary or secondary research. So one of the things is when each of us participates in a social media zone, we leave a residual evidence of our activities. This is our social footprint that we've talked about. So that social footprint is a data source. It could be, a rich source of secondary data. So it's what mainly social media researchers are focused on. But we can also conduct research through the social media channels for data collection. So we can actually collect primary data by using social media to conduct interviews, focus group surveys, or experiments. And Facebook is famous or infamous for some of the experiments it conducts through social media, where it literally messes around with your timeline and sort of posts your scenes to see what effect it has on your behavior. So there was one very controversial experiment where they actually experimented with people's moods by showing them a series of miserable, depressing posts in order to see if they click on more ads. And the result was that when they made people sad, they actually clicked on more ads. So that's a very, very disturbing finding. So then, if we think about, the qualitative research, social media research, in qualitative stuff, we're talking more describing things using words, where quantitative is about numbers. So qualitative is very descriptive. It gives us very rich descriptions of what happens, but it tends to be quite difficult to generalize. It doesn't give us neat kind of cause and effect relationships that we can apply to other situations. So, one of the main qualitative research methods is observational research. We actually record the behavior or the evidence of behavior. So we could actually, we could try and figure out how many packets of crisps were eaten at a football match by going around afterwards and counting the number of crisp wrappers on the ground. So what we're interested in is people's behavior. We're looking, but we're also listening. So it's really important that we remember that a lot of communication is both verbal and non-verbal. So if we're observing, we're not just what people are saying, but how they're acting. So if I conducted an interview over the phone, I wouldn't appreciate the fact that the other person was shaking their head. One of the things is I can see my own head on the camera, on the web camera here, and I realize, that I'm displaying an awful lot of behavior other than just in the tone of my voice, but also in how I move my head and, hand gestures and such things that can communicate extra information. One of the difficulties about this, though, it might necessarily be systematic. So it's very difficult to conduct, to observe people in a systematic way because they behave differently, and what we see will depend on our own mood. So what we also have to do is listen and respond. And we can use social media for listening. So one of the questions is that the argument is that immature organizations just tend to listen to the user in cyberspace, and there'll be an awful lot of noise there, whereas more mature organizations, are much more systematic, and they have an automatic collection of information. So they'll be using tools like Hadoop to gather huge amounts of information from Twitter or Instagram and try and make sense of that. But one of the problems is that, the information we're looking at may not be representative of the sites where relevant content is posted. So oftentimes we have what's called a convenience sample. So we take the data that's easily gathered, and that may not be appropriate for us. So if I focus on, I don't know, say for example, the Facebook posts of my friends, who are all maybe in their 40s. And I use that to make judgment about what students are thinking, and it's not really, it may be appropriate. Also, a lot of the information is suggestive, so it's actually it's hinting at things, but it may not be definitive. And it's really difficult to generalize this to broader population. So what somebody describes as their personal experience is very individual, and to actually make judgments about the population as a whole or customers as a whole based on the behavior of a couple of people is very challenging. And the other thing is to remember is we're just seeing a small fraction of what people are communicating about brands, and the vast majority of conversations they're having is offline. And this idea that 90% of the conversations of interest to marketers is offline. And, you can see this for different ones that they present offline and online. So be things like, huge amounts of conversations are carried out offline compared with online. So another method is ethnographic research. And this is, where we actually go visit people and observe them as they go about their daily tasks. So if rather than relying on student evaluation feedback, somebody from the university was to come in and actually sit in the lecture theatre and observe, that would be ethnographic. But then when we apply this to social media and the internet, we've got nethnography, and that's a rapidly growing research methodology that uses ethnographic research techniques to study online communities through these computer-mediated technologies. So the idea is, what we're seeking to do is study social interaction by participating within it and observing it. So if I was interested in how a particular group on Facebook behaved, rather than actually seeing myself as an external observer, I would actually join that group and participate with it and try and learn from it. So I'd actually immerse myself in it, and I become part of the data collection, but also the creation of the data itself. We get this really descriptive, rich context of the lived experience. So it's really rich description of what people are experiencing, and it's multi-method. So we have a whole series of different tools available. So we can use interviews, visual analysis, data science, and the idea is it's really, really adaptable. So we can use many different types of online sites and technologies. So it's a very, very widely applicable tool. So here we have a example of what the actual process consists of. So we define the research issue. We look for discussion group contents to find our target market, identify the community, and what are the specific topics. So then we subscribe to the pertinent group to actually get involved. Search discussion groups, filtering services, read FAQs, all these things are part of it. So we could actually post strategic queries to news groups, post surveys on website, offer rewards for participation, and the whole thing is to get people involved and create a kind of a chat room or community of consumers where we can actually get involved and learn from our customers. So this kind of slide deals with a whole series of tools we can use for social media listening. So something as simple as Google Alerts, where we can actually just set up an alert. So if something actually appears online, we get to find out about it. But we can use things like Scour them. We go out and actually search for things, or Google Trends, which I think I've shown already when we did our workshop on social media marketing campaign. The idea that we can actually see what's hot online at the moment and what people are actually searching for. There's a whole series of tools available to us, and I suggest you kind of Google some of these and experiment with them. Okay, so we're just going to wrap that one up, and then we're going to come back and finish this chapter in the next 15-minute block. So thank you for listening. I hope you're finding these useful. As I said, at any point, if you've got questions about any of the material in this online lecture, it's important that you either tweet me or use the Moodle discussion pages and ask questions, because if you feel you have a question, there's a fair chance that other people in the class will have the same question. Okay, see you in a few minutes. Bye.